Hey everyone, Martine here. So, as you may know, it is less than 3 weeks until the presidential election, a very stressful time for many of us, and there is a lot happening right now on the campaign trail. So, for the latest, you should check out today's episode of The Campaign Moment. My co-host, Aaron Blake, breaks down why Vice President Kamala Harris is struggling to gain support from groups that normally vote overwhelmingly Democrat, in particular from Black men. And he and our colleague Cleve Wootson talk through how the Harris campaign is trying to fix the problem. For anyone who is currently obsessed with the ups and downs in the polling in the presidential race, this is going to be a very eye-opening conversation. But to hear it, you're going to need to check out the feed for The Campaign Moment, which you can find very easily by searching for The Campaign Moment in your podcast app. Today on Post Reports, however, we want to share a special story with you from a completely different part of the world. We're passing the mic to reporter Rebecca Tan, the Southeast Asia bureau chief for the Post. Rebecca got unusually close access to a remarkable story that takes place out at sea, in one of the most geopolitically tense places in the world. We're going to follow a small group of fishermen, most of whom speak Tagalog, who are trying to challenge a powerful government. It's a story about who gets to own the open ocean and about the lengths people and governments are willing to go to defend what they believe is theirs. Also, just one quick note, about halfway through the episode, you will hear a curse word. All right, here's Rebecca.
Okay, it's currently 2:05 a.m. We are headed to take a bus to a port. So the beginning of our journey to get onto this boat. A few months ago, I jumped into a car with two of my colleagues, Yasmin Coles and Martin San Diego. Do you want to say hi, Martin?
Hi.
There's too much energy for the morning.
I'm excited to be, not excited to be sunburned. So,
Yeah.
We're in the Philippines, and we're heading to the western coast of its largest island. Our plan is to join a group of fishermen on a voyage that's expected to last 4 to 5 days. The destination is a place that means a lot to them, Scarborough Shoal. It's a 30-mile ring of reefs and rocks that surrounds a sparkling blue lagoon. For centuries, this has been a place of open passage and connection. It's one of the richest areas for fishing and minerals off this western coast. And it's in the South China Sea, a waterway claimed by at least 6 countries. These waters provide passage for about a third of all trade in the world. But for the fishermen we're about to meet on this voyage, it's been a source of their livelihoods for generations. It's also an important symbol to a nation that's deeply connected to fishing in the sea. Scarborough is only about 100 miles from the Philippine shoreline. But getting there, it's complicated.
Beijing claims it as Chinese territory and has controlled it for the past decade.
China says it has a historic claim to the territory.
The tiny mid-ocean outcrop, seized by China in 2012, has become a global geopolitical flashpoint.
China claims Scarborough is theirs, even though it's so much further away from it, roughly 700 miles.
黄岩岛是中国固有领土。
Recently, a Chinese spokesperson declared that Huangyan Island, as they call Scarborough, is a, quote, inherent territory of China.
采取必要措施，坚定维护自身领土主权和海洋权益。
The Chinese feel increasingly hemmed in by the U.S. and its allies like the Philippines and the Pacific. And they believe that keeping control of Scarborough is vital for maintaining its security interests in the waterway. But the Philippines is also now pushing harder to assert control over places like Scarborough, which they consider Philippine territory. And Chinese Coast Guard ships have responded by being increasingly aggressive.
China's Coast Guard fired water cannons at Philippine ships in disputed waters of the South China Sea. Actions the Philippines called irresponsible and provocative.
So this year and last year, we've seen on numerous occasions Chinese Coast Guard vessels ramming Philippine vessels, swarming them, spraying them with water cannons, shining lasers. For the Philippine fishermen and activists who will soon meet on this voyage, they want to be able to navigate these waters freely. They want to show that they have a right to fish there and drop off fuel and supplies to the Philippine fishermen who are already out there trying to stay afloat and operate in these waters. And so the question for those going aboard this boat, in this moment, is can they do this? And how far will they go?
In 600 meters, turn left. So we found out that some fishermen have dropped out from this mission, from the civilian mission.
As we get closer to the departure point, we learn that more and more people are dropping out because of how potentially dangerous the trip could be.
I think a lot of people have been responding to reports that there's going to be a big show of force by the Chinese. But we've assessed the risks and we're going to go ahead. Yeah. We'll see if we make it. We'll see if we make it to Scarborough.
From the newsroom of the Washington Post, this is Post Reports. It's Wednesday, October 16th. I'm Rebecca Tan, the Southeast Asia Bureau Chief for the Post. Today, I want to take you on my trip to the most contested waterway in the world. People generally know it as the South China Sea. In the Philippines, it has another name, the West Philippine Sea. I'm obsessed with the sea. I have an ocean fixation, an ocean obsession, and I've had it for a really long time. My own family history was shaped a lot by voyaging through the South China Sea. In the early 20th century, my grandparents were part of a wave of migrants who sailed from southern China to Singapore, where I was born. Part of the Nanyang Chinese community that were fleeing poverty and violence. I've heard the story at least 100 times. The story of how my grandmother came on a steamship from southern China to Singapore. And that decision, that journey, changed the trajectory of my entire family. It set up my life. And it's not just my family. In the 1970s and 1980s, thousands of Vietnamese refugees sailed through here when they were fleeing the war. So it's a place of immense connection and an immense amount of shared history. It's personally really meaningful for me to finally get out into the South China Sea, into these waters that so many others have sailed through before.
It's about 7:46 on day one of the journey. We've just departed the port of Boston Lock. We're leaving late. It took a while for everybody to get on board the different ships. So I'm on the smallest ship of 4 with about, I want to say, maybe 12 other people on board, half of whom are the crew of the ship who are helping to take us to Scarborough, or try to at least. The boat I'm on is a traditional Philippine outrigger. And so it's not maybe what you typically think of when you think of a boat. It doesn't really have sides on the edge of it. It's like a raft, and then it's got something to help it balance on both sides, tied together in some places by rope and zip ties, and they're effectively open air. Sorry, a lot of boats coming by. There are 4 fishing vessels like the one I'm on, and then there's hundreds of these small boats that are sailing out to sea with us. Basically, canoe-sized wooden boats that fit only 1 or 2 people. They're sailing with us for a period of time as a show of solidarity. It's quite a sight to behold, all these tiny boats sailing out into disputed waters together. We've also just learned that because the Chinese presence is really growing, the Philippine Coast Guard is sending a couple of ships to shadow us once we get out deeper into sea. It's noisy. The name of this boat, this raft I'm on, is the Paddy. And in the middle of the raft, there's a kind of captain's cabin. And that's where the steering happens. That's also where the main engine is. And where I'm perched is above the captain's cabin, on the roof of it, basically. There's a tarp
that they've set up there that provide some shade.
It's starting to get really hot already. It's been well over 100 degrees.
So as we get going, I want to get to know the people on the boat.
Yes, can we ask the captain a couple questions?
Sure.
So I'm with Yasmin Coles, who's a local journalist in the Philippines. As I try to talk to the crew members, I start with the captain, Jory Aguilan.
What do they fish in the West Philippine Sea? Typically, what do fishermen catch?
Ano yung mga nahuli nyo doon?
Skipjack.
Skipjack.
Tapos mackerel po.
Mackerel.
Yung galunggo.
Galunggo. Mackerel. Yeah, skipjack, mackerel.
He's quite young for a captain. He's 38. He looks much younger than that even. He's got sunglasses on and he's wearing beach shorts and flip-flops. And he's steering the patty like a pro. He's really relaxed. He's steering it with one hand.
So his whole family is fishermen.
Yung buong pamilya niyo po ba?
So he tells me that he's only been a captain for a couple years and that actually he's never sailed to Scarborough Shoal, though he's heard a lot about it.
Okay. So parang shipbuilder yung tatay niyo. His father's a shipbuilder at least. Yeah.
The reason he wanted to volunteer his boat for this trip was that he had grown up hearing a lot about Scarborough from his father, who was a shipbuilder and who had sailed many times himself to Scarborough in the 70s and 80s. And he's heard a lot about it. And so he feels strongly that the Philippines has a right to these waters. He feels strongly that he should have a right to visit the places, the reefs, the shoals that his father used to visit and used to fish at.
Yeah, he's not scared. I'm excited because this is for us.
So I ask him if he has a plan for what happens if the Chinese Coast Guard ships decide to water cannon the patty. What does he do then?
Sa totoo lang, yung mga tao naka-ready sila. Sa pwedeng mangyari.
He basically tells me that, he'll deal with it. He doesn't think that it's going to be a huge issue. That he thinks the crew that he's assembled will be able to handle whatever happens.
Pag nandiyan dyan na yung wet mo, yung pinubugahan ka na ng tubig.
As he tells me this, there's a part of me that wonders if he's a little bit naive or even a little bit foolhardy. Because the boat we're on is so small and held together by rope and zip ties, it's clear that any kind of violent confrontation with the Chinese would end very badly for us. But there's a sense, I think, that he, like me, is eager to go on this trip. People aboard this vessel, they're amped up. It's 10:40 a.m. We've been in sea for like 3 hours. We're far away now that we don't really see the shoreline. At this point, we're still quite some distance away from Scarborough. It's supposed to take 1.5 days to get there. The plan then is to fish and to distribute fuel and supplies to fellow fishermen, and then to make the journey back. Several hours pass. Suddenly, the boat slows down. I'm not really sure what's going on.
Exclusive economics.
I go to this guy, Matthew Silvera, who's a student activist. He stands out from the fishermen because he's really short and he's got these big round glasses. Everyone's taken off their life jackets, but he's continued to wear his and he's clutching onto it quite tightly.
Okay, so we've passed territorial waters. Now we're in the easy.
He tells me that the fishermen are about to drop some symbolic markers in the sea because we've now left Philippine territorial waters. And so this is the part of the water where it begins to be disputed, that China has now laid claim to.
That's why we're going to drop the symbolic markers. Because it's like the border of the...
So they're dropping these markers. There are these orange buoys that say on the side WPS, WPS being West Philippine Sea. And on the other side of the buoy, is Atin Ito, which means this is ours.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 21.
21?
Yeah. I'm in college.
You're a college student?
Yep.
So Matthew is not a fisherman. But so he tells me that he's a college student.
Well, I'm part of the student council.
He's studying public administration, and he's a member of the student council. That's what's brought him here. Young Filipinos and student activists have become active around this cause of pressing the Philippine claim to the West Philippine Sea, of standing up to what they see as superpower bullying. And so it's through the student council and through student activism that he's gotten involved with the group that's organized this sail, the Atin Ito, to represent the student activists all across the Philippines who care about this issue.
Remotely are reporting this in their schools.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
like 50 student councils all over the Philippines.
As I talk to Matthew, I get the sense that, he's extremely passionate about this issue, but certainly has his, reservations. Like many others on this boat, he's seen those videos of Chinese Coast Guard ships spraying, pounding, other vessels with water cannons.
So, I mean, how do you feel about it? If we do see a Chinese vessel, how do you...
Honestly, I'm terrified, personally, right?
Really?
He says he would be terrified. What I'm learning is that there are people like Matthew who are really quite scared about what's going to happen. But there are others here who are ready to confront the Chinese. People like Jose Taglian.
Okay. He's part of the crew that operates the nets.
Jose is 44. He's got a cap and a mustache. He looks, really fashionable to be on this boat. But I hear from the others that he's one of the fishermen that has worked for a really long time in these waters.
He's been working with Jory for 5 years.
He started as a fisherman in his early 20s. And, he seems quite fearless. So I asked him,
If he could talk to the Chinese, what would he say?
What would he say to the Chinese if he saw them?
Anong gusto mong sabihin sa kanila?
And he tells me he would tell them, what are you doing here? What are you doing in our backyard, in our territory? Like Jory, he's never been to Scarborough. He's never encountered Chinese Coast Guard ships. But he's seen them on TV and he's seen them, on videos.
So it's right about 5 p.m. The sun is finally starting to set, which is a big relief. I'm sitting near the tip of the boat, looking out into the sea. The waves haven't been too choppy, and no one's been too sick on my boat yet, which is great, and I'm feeling all right as well. There's a feeling of, I think, apprehension at the moment.
As we're out at sea, I get a notification. The Chinese Foreign Ministry is holding a regular press conference. And at the press conference, they address this voyage that's happening, that's underway. And they issue a warning.
黄岩岛是中国固有领土，中国对黄岩岛及其附近海域拥有无可争辩的主权。
In Beijing, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry, Wang Wenbin, he says, relevant responsibilities and consequences shall be borne solely by the Philippines.
如果非方滥用中方的善意，侵犯中国领土主权和管辖权。
So this isn't theoretical or abstract anymore. It's a clear threat.
相关责任和后果完全由非方承担。
The stakes of what we're getting into here are coming into focus. This isn't just a flotilla of fishing vessels heading out to sea. It's a contest of governments.
On the area of foreign policy,
The Philippine president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is behind these fishermen.
I will not preside over any process that will abandon even 1 square inch of territory of the Republic of the Philippines to any foreign power.
In his first nationwide speech in 2022, he made clear that the Philippines was going to fight for its territory. And this marked a change from the previous administration that was more pro-China.
But we will not waver.
Marcos also has a powerful ally in his corner, the United States. The US and the Philippines have a long-standing agreement to defend one another that dates back to 1951. And the Biden administration has stressed that it will honor that agreement.
I want to be clear. I want to be very clear. The United States defense commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. The United States defense agreement with the Philippines is ironclad. Any attack on the Filipino aircraft vessels or armed forces will invoke our mutual defense treaty with the Philippines.
And what this means is that an attack on the Philippines could be seen effectively as an attack on the US. So if a Philippine sailor is killed while trying to reach one of the reefs, or if any of us are seriously injured on this voyage, there's a real possibility that the US could be drawn into a genuine kinetic war with China in the Pacific. You know, as the night begins to fall, I'm feeling like, maybe this is all that will happen on the first day, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. But I'm wrong. Is it moving? In the distance, there's a shadow in the horizon, and it's getting bigger and kind of clearer. So then the photojournalist, Martin Sandiego, who's traveling with us, he takes out his telephoto lens to aim it at that shadow.
I can read the writings on the boat. It says China Coast Guard.
So that's definite confirmation. And that's when we realize our meeting with the Chinese Coast Guard has come quite early. They're here. There's, a flurry of activity. Jory and Matthew are in the captain's cabin, and they are radioing the other boats there on this voyage, and they're radioing as well the Philippine Coast Guard. And that's when we learned that one of the bigger kind of fishing boats has gotten a message from the Chinese Coast Guard basically saying, leave. So it's about 5:34. What started as a very distant shadow next to the Philippine Coast Guard vessel that has been with us has now emerged clearly as a ship. It's moving slowly, basically side by side, but we can definitely see them, and they can definitely see us. There's been a Philippine Coast Guard ship that has been accompanying the fishing ships, and originally we thought, okay, the Chinese Coast Guard ship was going to try to shadow the Philippine Coast Guard ship, and that's what we see. So the Chinese Coast Guard ship that we saw did a U-turn and is now shadowing the Philippine Coast Guard vessel. It's really gaining speed on it. Like it's very close to the Philippine Coast Guard vessel now. And it's getting closer every second. We're seeing how quickly the Chinese Coast Guard ship can sail, actually. Soon after, though, the Chinese Coast Guard ship pivots. It's approaching one of the civilian ships right in front of us. It's getting really close to them. And heads towards us. Towards the fishing boats. And it's starting to kind of weave in between the fishing boats, cutting us off from one another. It might break up the flotilla, I think.
It's coming our way now.
Oh, okay. Now it's turned and it's coming towards us. before we quite are able to grasp what's happening,
okay, there's now another boat.
A second Chinese Coast Guard ship appears.
There's one more.
And then a third.
We're right at the tip of the ship and we're looking out. It's right there. It's right in front of us.
So we're being encircled now by these Chinese Coast Guard ships. And as they come, quite close to the fishing boats, we're getting a real sense of their size. Chinese Coast Guard ships are the biggest in the world. I think the overwhelming sense on the boat at this point is, holy shit.
Captain Jody is leaning right at the tip of the ship. He's got his arm on the blue rope. It's holding the ship together and he's looking straight out. This is his first confrontation with the Chinese, but he's replicating what many Philippine boat captains have experienced before.
The Chinese Coast Guard vessels are coming close enough that I can not only read the reading by the side of the boat, but I can see the sailors on the deck. They're holding binoculars. As we're looking at them, they are looking at us. You feel small.
And we see now the red Chinese flag being flown in the wind.
That feeling of David versus Goliath becomes a lot more palpable. And I think everyone is kind of taking that in, as this happens. Nobody's quite sure what to do.
They're just now passing us.
As it gets darker, the Chinese ships slowly begin to retreat, but not far enough for them to fully disappear. We see them tailing us, tailing the Philippine Coast Guard, tailing, the fishing boats. They know where we are and they're sending still a clear message that they're right there with us. But they've not stopped us from continuing on. And so as night falls,
it's about 7:15 p.m. The sun has set, so it's completely dark now. So I've just come to the back of the boat to sit down for a little bit, to rest for a second. The two Chinese Coast Guard vessels that were following us are still here. We can see their lights not far from us. I think for now I'm just gonna take some medication and try to get some rest. I don't know, it's the waters feel choppier. I'm definitely, I think this is for the first time I'm getting pretty nauseous.
The waves are getting bigger, the boat starts to slow down. But we're still pressing on towards Scarborough. At this point, everybody's determined still to get there. As I go to bed, I can hear Jory and Jose sitting together on the nets on the back of the ship, laughing and fishing for squid at night. So they're catching squids with a line, and I fall asleep listening to that.
That was the first half of our story from Rebecca Tan. After the break, Rebecca and the crew wake up for day 2 on the South China Sea. We'll be right back.
It's about 6:20 a.m. on day 2. The fishing boats have stopped to fish. They've dropped nets and they're pulling them up right now. To our right, we can see the Philippine Coast Guard. And now that the light is starting to be daytime, in the distance we can see that the Chinese Coast Guard has continued to follow us overnight. There'll be more action today, definitely.
We wake up in the morning. I think everyone's had a night to process and to think about what just happened the night before. And at this point, I want to know, how is Jory feeling?
Is he surprised by, what they
So I go up to Jory, who's in the captain's cabin, and I ask him, what do you make of this? What does he think of what we saw yesterday? And he was tentative. He said he'd seen the Chinese Coast Guard ships on YouTube and Facebook before, but seeing them in person was completely different. He talked about how big they were, how aggressive they can be. He still wants to go to Scarborough, he says, but only if it's safe. But
we've come to a stop. I see one of the other ships around us, but the other two...
I'm starting to sense a little bit more apprehension. As people, on our boat and on the other boats start to wake up, there now begins to be some discussion over what we should do, whether or not we should continue on with the sail and with the voyage. The members of the organizing group, Atenito, they're having conversations with other members of the group. On the other boats, there's a debate unfolding over radio between the captains over what to do. Another person I can sense is getting more nervous is the college student, Matthew Silvero. He's one of the only people that still has his life jacket on. And I can see that he's spending a lot of time in the captain's cabin, listening to what the other boats are radioing in. I can also see that he's on his phone a lot. There's a Starlink that's been set up, and so he's communicating with other activists in the group.
So we're kind of just drifting in the water and waiting to find out.
About an hour and a half goes by. All of a sudden, we come to a stop. And the discussion, it starts to heat up.
Okay, we're still about 40 miles from Scarborough.
I'm looking at Jose and some of the other fishermen who are still working. There's a lot to keep a boat like this afloat. They're pulling ropes, they're untangling the nets that they used that morning. But as they're working, I can see them putting one ear toward the captain's cabin, waiting to see the verdict. What feels very clear in this moment is that the uncomfortable tension underlying all this is that there's this real and compelling concern of actual damage and real injury from confronting the Chinese Coast Guard. So I can see that people are having more conversations about this, and I want to check in again with Jory. So I climb down from above the captain's cabin, and I see him steering the boat. He's tapping the steering wheel kind of anxiously.
What does he think? Does he want to go to Scarborough still?
But just around then, a Chinese Coast Guard boat passes us by, really close this time, and he darts out to take a look. At the same time, I see Matthew, the activist, gather a bunch of people to the tip of the boat. They yell out at the Chinese Coast Guard ship. They're saying, West Philippine Sea, Atenito. West Philippine Sea, it's ours. Matthew is really worked up. Another activist that has put up his rosary beads in the air with a 3-finger salute spelling out W for West Philippine Sea. Some of them have their fists in the air. Everybody on board this boat wants to show their opposition. But then underlying that demonstration is this larger tension, this larger choice of whether they do have the ability to stand up for the Philippines beyond yelling at the ship. A little bit after this, I see Matthew kind of headed towards us to talk to Jory. Before he can get to Jory, Yaz and I stop him.
The advance party of Atin and the Coalition is already reached.
Matthew then goes ahead and tells me that actually there was a earlier boat that went ahead of the 4 fishing boats that we're with. They almost made it to Scarborough when they were confronted by a Chinese Navy ship. They were trying to go around the Navy ship when they got radio messages from Philippine fishermen that had been stationed at Scarborough Shoal, that had been fishing at Scarborough Shoal. And the message was, do not proceed, do not proceed. The Chinese had sailed onto Scarborough Shoal in force, and they had chased out basically every last Philippine fisherman that had been there. And so there was no one left there to receive any supplies, Matthew said.
There are no more fisher folks there.
So we're not gonna go?
No, we're not gonna go.
We were turning around.
So we're not gonna go to Scarborough, we're not gonna see the blockade?
It's about 10:30 a.m. on day 2. From here, we're going to be turning back around. We're drifting. The goal of this voyage was to strengthen the Philippine presence at Scarborough Shoal by sailing there and by giving reinforcements and supplies to the Philippine fishermen who are fishing there and operating there, as they have for generations. But the voyage was ending with dozens of Chinese ships, as many as 40 Chinese ships, surrounding Scarborough Shoal and driving all the fishermen who were there away for now. In state-run news outlets, the Chinese government circulated photos of our boat and accused the Philippine fishermen of illegally trespassing on their waters, conducting activities, quote, irrelevant to legitimate fishing.
The mission is backing down from what the Chinese have.
Well, not really, because we really expected.
So Matthew tells me yes, we're turning around. For the organizers of the voyage, the activists like Matthew, they're saying that they see the voyage still as a success. They sailed into the disputed waters as a civilian fleet. And he says they managed to distribute some supplies to Philippine fishermen they met along the way. He says, basically, we did our mission. Atenito still completed its mission. What they told themselves was that they got under China's skin, right? They warranted such a response from China, which shows that they were kind of poking the dragon. But not everyone on board the ships thinks of it that way. When I found Jose, one of the fishermen who was most eager to get to Scarborough, he told us if it was up to me,
If it's up to me, we should have gone straight to Scarborough Shoal because it is ours.
we would have sailed straight to Scarborough because it's ours. He said the plan was to sail to Scarborough, but what ended up happening was as though China had just escorted us away. So then I also asked him, why do you think the Chinese have gotten so powerful in these waters? And he said, I don't know how China became so powerful, but I know they prepared for war. And that's what we didn't do. We didn't prepare for war.
For war, yeah. And that's what we didn't do. We didn't prepare for war.
So it's a 16 to 20 hour journey back. We're slated to arrive at dawn the next day. You know, after the commotion of the day, everyone's gone, back to their little corners to rest, to think. And, I go to the little edge of the roof of the captain's cabin where I've been sitting. And as the sun sets and it gets dark, I think back to what it was like when we left the shore, when we left the port, the excitement that everyone was feeling, the enthusiasm, all those little boats following us as a show of solidarity, the kind of energy and determination that people had. And this is a very different sail
back to shore. The fishermen, as they work, are not talking as much. They're fishing, more in silence. Most of what people want to do is to get back to shore. In the weeks and months since our sail, tensions between China and the Philippines have only sharpened. In another confrontation, Chinese and Philippine ships collided pretty badly, and a Philippine sailor was actually pretty severely injured. Just a couple weeks after that, there was yet another collision at another reef that was closer to the Philippine mainland.
The Philippines and China have accused each other of ramming vessels and performing dangerous and unlawful maneuvers.
China has sent fighter jets over Scarborough Shoal, which the Philippines has heavily protested. It doesn't feel like there's a clear way out of this. China will not give up its claims over the South China Sea. And the Philippines, now with the backing of the US, seems resolute not to back down either. In the long history of the South China Sea, I know that it's been this place of connection, migration, openness. It's been a place that people have sought refuge and fished together and sailed together. I think this voyage and the rest of my reporting that I've done this year on the South China Sea has shown that it's turning away from that. More and more, it's losing that identity. Jory and the fishermen, they have to figure out what to do amid all of this. The last time we spoke, I asked if he had any plans to go back to Scarborough, to try again to reach it. He said no. He said nobody was.
That was Rebecca Tan, the Southeast Asia bureau chief for The Washington Post, reporting at sea with Yasmin Colas and Martin San Diego. Rebecca has been traveling all around the South China Sea, from Vietnam to Singapore, uncovering even more developments in these disputed waters. You can find links to those stories and to stunning images from this trip in our show notes. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. And don't forget about our newest episode of The Campaign Moment, for the latest on the final stretch of the U.S. presidential campaign. We explore one of the biggest questions that could determine the outcome of this race. Again, you can listen to it by following The Campaign Moment on your podcast app and check out the latest show from today. Today's episode was produced by Alana Gordon. It was edited by Peter Bresnan with help from Rena Flores and mixed by Sean Carter. Special thanks to Alan Cypress. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.